Hello? Oh, there we go. I just have to be close to it. Welcome. Thanks for coming. We're going to get started. Folks want to grab a seat. Hi, I'm Representative Emilie Kornheiser. I am a member of the Legislative Climate Caucus. I'm here with a number of other legislators who will introduce in a minute. And we are here today to have a conversation about the Climate Caucus's goals for this upcoming session. We put you at tables because some of the time we really want you to be speaking to each other. And so we'll have a minute to give introductions in a second. Our goals for tonight are to build a broader public understanding of and support for the big banner policies that we identified and are being advanced by the Legislative Climate Solutions Caucus in 2020. We want to deepen your knowledge of these policy priorities, why they're needed and how, and acknowledge that many of you might have deeper knowledge of those policies than we do, and that's part of the wonder of being a citizens legislature. So I want to acknowledge that too. We want to build enthusiasm for them and set the stage to ask you to partner with us and with policymakers and with experts in really moving this legislation forward and own that we are all in this together today. Even though the legislators are standing up because they don't want to take your chairs. But I think it's awkward, I'm going to ask them to go find their chairs.
We'll find chairs if we need.
They're very generous standing for you.
I want to sit in my chair right here.
And to that end, I want to read an email, just a little paragraph from an email that I got from a member of the Brattleboro community today. She's a very avid activist. She signed on to 3 of the letters that the Climate Caucus were delivered today. And she sent me a few words sort of about why she signed on to these letters, about what we need to do about climate change, and some thoughts on it. And so this is sort of her way of starting the introduction for all of us. For me, the climate crisis is a human rights crisis and is inextricably linked to other human rights crises, such as the lack of healthcare, housing, and in many places, the lack of clean air and clean water, as well as ecosystem destruction. We do need to demand these human rights, but I believe that as members of a citizen legislature, your role, that would be the legislator's role, is to stand with us in making these demands. Our role as fellow citizens and voters is that dual role of holding our elected representatives accountable while also supporting you in taking stands that will at times require courage on your part. And so we're here today to really take the next step in building that partnership with all of you. And so I want to start off with that quote before I introduce Representative Sarah Copeland-Hanzas from Bradford, who is the co-chair of the Climate Solutions Caucus and is going to take us through a lot of the content today. Thanks, Sarah. And she drove through, I think, a closed highway to get here tonight. So thank you.
I followed the detour like they told me to, even though I really kind of wanted to drive down 91 anyway, but they said they were still cleaning up after a bad accident from earlier today. So anyway, it's great to be here, and I think it's helpful to share with you a little bit of what we've done that brings us to this moment where we are out in community night after night after night having this conversation and having a public engagement process on bold climate action. So many of the members of the Climate Solutions Caucus were dissatisfied with the progress that was made in this past legislative session. We know, as many of you do, that in order to change the trajectory of our greenhouse gas emissions, we need to be doing much more, much faster, much more comprehensively than what has been done. And we've been frustrated because we have felt like we've come up against roadblocks. Now, when I've been in the legislature long enough to have come up against a lot of different roadblocks. And when I was first elected, it was in post-civil unions time when the Democrats had lost the majority, and we were climbing back out of that to build the momentum that we needed to go to full marriage equality. So I understand what it means to be frustrated and to be working towards a goal that you feel should have happened yesterday. I've been part of it before, and that's why I don't shy away from this seemingly unfathomable task of trying to get Vermont on the right track. So we started in May with an all-day retreat just less than a week after we had adjourned, and 35 or so members of the Climate Solutions Caucus, which is now numbering around 85 members. 35 members came back to Montpelier, post-session, everybody's going back to their day job, but there was a good core group of us who said, no, we need to really take a look and figure out how we can make some progress going forward. We are not satisfied with spinning our wheels like we feel we did this past legislative session. We need to put more energy, more effort, more focus into it. We need to be smarter and more strategic about how we make progress. And so from that day came 3 policy working groups, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the recommendations of those policy working groups. And from that also came one working group whose goal was to help facilitate these kinds of meetings, because we knew it wasn't enough just to put some great ideas on paper in May, June, and July. We knew that we needed to get out and build momentum for these policies, because the thing that has been the missing link in years past is that people are putting forward good ideas, but there are enough folks in Montpelier, whether it be the governor or whether it be some of our colleagues in the legislature, who just aren't feeling it. They're not feeling that there's an overwhelming push. They're not feeling that there is political liability in inaction. They're feeling like, in the past, they have felt like there is political liability in acting on climate. And so our goal throughout the fall has been to get out and do this public engagement so that we can build a momentum and build hopefully a team of Vermonters who are willing to step forward and say, this is where we need to move, and this is what we want you, our elected leaders, to do.
So before we jump in, some quick housekeeping. There are exit signs pointing you towards the exit. There are a lot of exits, as you might have found upon trying to enter. There is bathrooms down the hall. There is some water and pitchers on this table right here. Had a little bit of an existential crisis about refreshments and waste, and so just went for some pitchers of water. I hope you brought a bottle with you. And would like to take a minute first for all of the legislators to go around and really just introduce yourself, your name and where you represent, and then we're going to ask you each at your tables to spend just a minute introducing yourselves to each other at your table and why you're here today, and one thing that you're either hoping to learn or something that you're curious about. So if maybe start from Tristan and go from there.
I don't project very well, but I'm Tristan Tolino. I'm one of the 3 representatives from Brattleboro. I've long been interested in understanding human impact on climate and what we can do to mitigate it. I'm actually just really interested in hearing what our community has to offer to the legislature and help inform the work that we have to do to create consensus around some sort of package of impactful steps. And so I'm just here in listening mode, super excited to be here.
Great.
My next?
Yes, if you could bring us back to the prompt
See who else is here.
of just your name and
I am going to do that.
Thank you.
Representative Emilie Long from Newfane. I represent the towns of Marlboro, Newfane, and Townsend.
Jeanette White from Putney, and I represent Windham County in the Senate.
Laura Spillion from Dover, Wardsboro, Dover, Whitingham, Searsburg, Stamford, and I missed it. Becca Balint, the other senator from Windham County. I live right here in Brattleboro.
Representative Mollie Burke, one of the 3 representatives from Brattleboro.
I'm Sarah Coffey. I'm the representative from Guilford and Vernon.
Hi, I'm Mike Berwicki. I represent Putney, Dummerston, and Westminster, and I left my voice in Putney.
Thank you, Mike. So if folks could take a minute, talk to either the people at your table or people you're clustered with in chairs and just introduce yourselves to each other, why you came here, something you're curious about, and really try to make space to listen to the other people at your table, because that's what this is going to take.
Yes, I see them in the pottery over there.
I know see them, there was a pile of with some fish left, the pile of
Certification as well, not just sitting in the seat of
Building science.
You're right. Okay, counterclockwise. Okay. I am but I'm usually as low-income person who wants this change to happen. What rather than to other groups that are trying different ways. And why some of those people are here.
The what?
Started lunch and
And I just didn't really know it was too long after that, but with the exercises and whether they got drafted in this meeting, I was just curious to see where it is behind the public. And I was trying to because, from what she was saying, it sounds like there are people that are moving forward and around action. And wanting to support the change is going to be meaningful and not just static. And that's going to be addressing the situation. So I was curious to see, and I am curious to sort of understand where they are and what they're.
No, this is.
Certainly, a lot of students have been showing up. We're just a student coalition.
Keep
There are.
My name is Kurt. I go on order.
People in
I hate that routine. My name is Kurt. I'm the director of Brattleboro Conversations. We're advocating radical.
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea. Yes. And email some people who can sign in. Or maybe you should say
human-powered transportation. My goal getting out of the automobile.
So what kind of stuff
Well, what I would do
Now you're
I went there to this
Don't you all wish we weren't here and you could just talk to each other all night? That'd be great. We could just end the meeting and you could solve it at your individual tables. That would be really fun.
bringing it in.
Yes, I am.
Okay.
So,
Which happens around England.
we are going to, you will have more moments to talk to each other, don't you worry.
Yeah.
Before we go into a few minutes where Sarah is going to be talking and everyone's going to be listening, I want to point out a few things on your table. There are pads of paper and index cards. I am going to not quite gently invite you to, when you have a question, whether it's a clarifying question or a correcting question or anything that you want to say, to take a moment and write it down on that piece of paper, because there's so many of you and we want a chance to get as many people's voices as possible into this room today. And so I'm going to ask you to write down those questions, and we're going to send them up regularly, and I'm going to sort through them and group them, and I don't know who else listens to On Being, but for me, it's like this paper going up is like a sacred part of the listening and the conversation. So we're going to try that out today and see if that works to share the space a little bit. There are pins too, so, and share if you need to share. Thanks.
I think I counted 75 people, which is outstanding. Thank you so much for coming out on a chilly gray night.
Is that close enough?
You want me to be that
Yeah.
close, don't you? It's kind of creepy.
Anyway, thank you all for being here. There's also some paper and a pen going around for email addresses. If you are here, we would love to be able to send you an email at strategic times during the legislative session and say, you know, this action is up on the floor, and please, you know, please call and express your support. So please do put your email address on there, and we promise that we won't spam you. It'll be critical communications. So I wanted to take a few minutes just to kind of set the context of where we are. I know that you all are fairly well focused on climate action, and therefore you understand that Vermont has some climate goals. The yellow dotted line is our goals starting in 1990 to reduce our emissions And we have some reality. And the reality is that our actuals are I don't understand why it does that. Our actuals are jumping up and down, but we are in general not making progress where we want to go. And in fact, in most recent years, our emissions have been rising. The next slide shows where those emissions are rising from. And so if you take a look at the black section of this and the red section, the black is our transportation emissions, the red is our heating, so our building energy emissions. And you can see that those together are a huge portion of our total greenhouse gas pollution since 1990. And again, just like the other graph, heading in the wrong direction. So we know where we want to start to bite off some of these emissions and start to bend the curve because in many of the other areas, our emissions are much lower. Why do we want to do this? So I include this slide because there are some people out there who don't believe that climate change is real and don't believe that it is a crisis that is threatening our very way of life, threatening our winters, threatening our maple sugaring season. Quite sure why it does that. But this is the economic reason why we need to take action, in addition to the environmental reason. The economic reason is that we spend $2 billion a year in Vermont, and about $1.8 billion of that goes right out of the state in terms of profits to the fossil fuel industry. And so if we want to, in the context of stimulating our economy, if we want to make sure that we are creating jobs, we've got to start keeping a big chunk of that money in Vermont. And so if we start thinking of ways of generating the energy that we need to heat our buildings and to move ourselves around in-state, by weatherizing our homes, we are creating jobs in-state. By generating more electricity in-state, we are keeping more of that money recirculating in the Vermont economy. And that is the prime objective of a lot of what we're doing. Now this is going to give me about 20 seconds and then it's going to jump to the next slide. So I'm going to talk really quickly and see if I can get through it. We have 4 main policy priorities for this year, okay? And remember, when I was setting the context for you, we were frustrated. We are not satisfied with the level of attention that we've been able to get in terms of legislative prioritization of climate action. And so these are the 4 areas that we are concentrating on that came out of those summer policy working groups. I will tell you that there is a 4th policy working group that came about after we realized we had some gaps, and that is a policy working group that's really focused on resiliency. So when we know that we're going to have a more volatile climate, we know we're going to have bigger storms, we know we're going to have threats to our agricultural sector, to our ski industry, to our transportation infrastructure by bigger storms. We know that we need to focus on resiliency at the same time as we focus on bending our emissions in the right direction. So the Resiliency Working Group is still meeting now. They will continue to meet probably right up until the session starts, and I expect that we will incorporate their recommendation as a priority of the Climate Solutions Caucus as well. It's just that we're going to give them the extra time they need to work on that. So the four main policies that we're working on this year can be summed up by the words accountability, cap and invest, building efficiency, and the electrification transition. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on each of them. So the Global Warming Solutions Act. This is a concept, this is a bill that was introduced this past year based on a decade-old law that passed in Massachusetts called the Global Warming Solutions Act. Now, if any of you have read that, please hold your criticisms of it because we get it. It was a decade ago. We looked at what Massachusetts did. There have been other states who have adopted better bills since then, and we have folks who are working on rewriting the Global Warming Solutions Act based on the fact that New York and Maine passed much stronger bills with much clearer mandates to who will be responsible for bringing together the state government entities to to bring about the greenhouse gas reductions. What you want to know about the Global Warming Solutions Act fundamentally is that it is all about accountability, okay? We've had these goals, okay, these aspirations of greenhouse gas emissions reductions for decades, but we've been blowing through every single one of them because they were not requirements in statute. So the fundamental difference that we get with the Global Warming Solutions Act is that we take our aspirations and we put them into law, and that demands that the legislature and the administration sit down together and figure out how we're going to get this done, okay? It is a strategy to make sure that we're focusing every state agency on cutting pollution. So if you feel frustrated that the Public Utilities Commission maybe isn't taking this as seriously as they should be, the Global Warming Solutions Act is a tool to force that. And again, this is foundational to all of our future action because once we have this as requirements, then we have a reason to say, yes, Governor, you need to sit down with us and we need to figure out how to make X, Y, and Z happen. The second objective of the Climate Solutions Caucus for January is the Cap and Invest, the Transportation and Climate Initiative. So this is an initiative that has been in development for a number of years, and it includes 13 jurisdictions from Maryland and the Washington, D.C. area all the way up through New England. And all of these jurisdictions are coming together around how to put a cap on transportation emissions and do a cap and trade system so that you can invest the proceeds of that into speeding the adoption of carbon-free transportation technology. So whether that means electric bikes, electric school buses, electric vehicles, electric charging infrastructure, better pedestrian access, maybe passenger rail that would allow for folks to get from point A to point B in a more efficient way. All of these things can come out of the Transportation and Climate Initiative, but because this is something that's being developed by the governors of all of these jurisdictions, we know that we need to be able to weigh in with our governor and say, when you do this, these proceeds are not going to be put into building bridges and paving roads. These proceeds are going to be put solely into advancing the goal of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. And so there will be some strong principles that we want to weigh into this. Representative Mollie Burke is on the Transportation Committee on the House side. She'll be focused on that, I'm sure. And as we look at TCI and as we look at the ways that we can use this to accelerate our transition, we also want to look at best practices with other states. And so I've been advocating with some of the organizations that convene legislators from many different states to say, look, bring us together and let us share best practices and ideas on how we can use this money and how we can accelerate this transition. And so that is work that is in progress, and honestly, it is, I'm cautiously optimistic that that's going to be a source of funding for accelerating the transformation we need to do in our transportation sector. So transportation was one of the big emissions blocks on one of those first graphs, and building energy was the other. And so we know that there's a lot of work that we need to do in Vermont in terms of encouraging greater building efficiency. We have building codes in Vermont that require your building to be built to a certain standard of efficiency and of insulation, using certain materials. But the fact of the matter is that those building codes are not enforced. And we have a culture in Vermont that would be very offended if we suggested saying that you can't go build your own house because you don't know how to build to the building codes. And so we're going to look at this first step here this year. We're going to look at doing some making some progress in terms of workforce development. We want to make sure that the frontline workers who not only are helping you build your home or helping you put in a new heating system or are helping you do your plumbing and electrical, we want to know that they know the best practices. But we also want to know that when you go to sell your house, that the person who appraises your house and the realtor who puts your house on the market knows how to talk about the energy efficiency investments that you've made in your house. How many of you have gone to a car dealership to try to buy a highly fuel efficient or electric vehicle and found not a single salesperson who knew how to talk to you about an electric vehicle? This happened to me. All right, so it's happened to some of you. It is the most frustrating thing. We have a lot of work that we need to do in terms of making sure that frontline workers who are helping us in the building energy realm know best practices and can talk to Vermonters about best practices and know how to make these efficiency investments measurable so that it becomes more standard practice to work on weatherizing and insulating your home. In the long term, we know we need to have a dedicated funding source for making these investments in weatherization of our homes. And we had a little investment in that this past year. The House and Senate had two different ideas of how to do that. We both know, between the House and the Senate, we know that we need to make these investments and that we need it to be a sustainable funding source so that we can continue to help Vermonters weatherize their homes. So electrification. So we need to as we transition away from fossil fuels in our heating and transportation, that is by nature going to demand that we have access to more power through electricity. We want that electricity to be generated in-state. We want it to be generated renewably. We don't want to simply sign on to some more hydropower from Quebec. We want energy independence in Vermont, and the Climate Solutions Caucus believes very clearly that we need to make sure that we're taking a look at our renewable energy standard in order to promote that new in-state energy development. We've got to be able to remove some of the barriers. Here's a for instance that we did last year. We need to do more things like this. There was a cap on the amount of energy that a solar installation could generate for a particular customer. And that cap was such that if Bradford Elementary School and Newbury Elementary School merged into one district, then because Bradford already had a solar field, Newbury couldn't have one because now they're one electric customer and the rule said you can't have more than 500 kilowatts for one customer. So we removed that cap, and last week, standing out in the cold snow one day, I got to go to the ribbon cutting for the solar field that is going to provide Newbury Elementary School with enough solar electricity to meet their electricity needs. It's going to save the taxpayers money, and it is clean, locally sourced energy. A lot of good jobs went into building that solar array, and that's just the kind of work that we need to continue to do as we work on electrifying as much as we can. We need to make sure that we're streamlining the incentives for the low carbon technologies as well. Because right now, if you go to a car dealership and you want to buy an electric vehicle, they have to know who your electric provider is in order to know how to look up on the chart what your incentive is going to be. Well, we could probably streamline that because we've got more than a dozen different electric utilities around the state, all of whom are offering different kinds of incentives. If we can streamline that, it will work better for Vermonters, and we can make sure that we're maximizing those kinds of incentives. One of the ways that we can think about doing this is to take the model of Efficiency Vermont, which has helped Vermonters save money on their electric bills for a long time, and is a well-known name out there in terms of helping you reduce your electricity bills. And we could turn Efficiency Vermont into an all-fuels efficiency utility so that Efficiency Vermont, that trusted name, those people who are already out in our communities, could be helping you save money on your transportation fuels and on your heating bills as well. And that is one way that we can work on speeding this transition to electrification. And that is it for the 4 main priorities of the Climate Solutions Caucus. And before we go to the next part in the agenda, I just want to come back a little bit to the context of where we were. We have a governor who despite the fact that he declared Vermont would meet its Paris climate goals, hasn't proposed any legislation or any spending in order to make that happen, okay? And in the context of a governor who's the administration is the people who are in Montpelier year-round, who have access to the experts and the scientists and the data that, that we need access to in order to enact some of these changes. We need a governor who's going to be a better partner in this and is going to start to feel the demands of Vermonters saying it's time for bold climate action. And so part of the reason why we're bringing this out to folks is to invite you to help us make that expectation felt across a broader swath of elected officials, not just the folks who are here who I think are already get it and are already on board. So I'm going to hand this back to Emilie, and she's going to tell us what's next.
The next step would be clarifying questions. Does everyone understand the difference between a clarifying question and an expository question, or a declarative question, or even just a deeply substantive question? A clarifying question, or an interrogative question, thank you. A clarifying question is really just sort of a detail that you might have missed. Perhaps you didn't see the slide. Perhaps there's some language you didn't understand. You would like a refresher on definitions. Those would be clarifying questions so that we can all be starting from closer to the same page as we move into a deeper discussion. While people pass up clarifying questions, I just want to give a little bit, until I got to the legislature, I don't know if I understood sort of the complexity of how policy is made and how, even though we have a climate caucus, we are separated into very separate conversations having those. So these seem like big banner bills. You know, we want to do a Green New Deal, whatever it is. It seems like, yes, we should be able to move forward with big, bold, comprehensive legislation. But the way legislation moves forward is committee, but the legislators are going to come around and pick up your cards, and they're doing a great job of that. Thank you. Legislation moves forward through each committee. And so if we think about the accountability bill that we're talking about here, that's going to spend some time in government operations with Representative Mike Muricky. It's going to have some capital spending linked to it, so it's going to spend some time in Representative Sarah Coffey's committee where she focuses on the capital bill. And so that's just one bill that will then have to spend time in two committees, and it seems like sort of one of the smaller bills. So if we think about the workforce bill, that's going to spend some time in economic development, commerce and economic development with Representative Tolino and myself. And it's also going to spend some time in energy and technology, probably with Representative Sibilia. So these bills, the more comprehensive they are, the more stops they need to take on a very long train, and we're only in session for 6 months. So before I got to the legislature, I was like, why can't they think bigger? Why can't they think more comprehensively? The more comprehensive a bill is, the longer it takes to make its stops and the less likely it is to pass. So when we break it up into separate pieces, but we're all collaborating with each other, we have a much better chance of moving it forward, even though it doesn't sound as exciting on a poster. Does that make sense? Great. Can you read them? Or you can, would that make it like a more fun game show?
Well, I think ideally there's you want to spend a group now. So I'm going to run through a couple more slides here while
Oh, sorry. Yes, I know. I'm supposed to be actually touching it, which kind of creeps me out.
So one of the questions that we often get at these events is, what should I do if I want to help? What should I do if I believe that we need to be making climate action now? So these are some of the groups who are actively organizing Vermonters to help reach out to their elected officials and ask for progress on this. The Climate Solutions Caucus has been meeting with these groups on a regular basis. Our next meeting with them is on Friday morning. And we've been talking about ways that we can energize and educate their constituencies. And so if you see a group that you recognize or a group that you are even a part of, you should definitely make sure that you are on their distribution list, because they may be giving out calls to action in order to help Vermonters understand how to lobby the elected officials to make progress.
We have a few process questions,
Yes.
which I thought might be helpful. So could you briefly explain the process that led to the articulation of the 4 priority areas?
Yes, so the process was, we had 3 policy working groups meeting over the summer, meeting and having, taking testimony from different organizations and different professionals, and crafting what the set of priorities would be for each of those policy working groups. The policy working groups were on building energy and thermal efficiency. They were on transportation. And the third one was on the green economy and renewable energy. And so from those working groups, we got about 27 pages of recommendations, which is a really great problem to have. And so the leadership of the Climate Solutions Caucus took a look at those and said, okay, which are the really big ideas? Which are the ones that really rise to the top as fundamental and as really big priority issues that we need to work on? And then we said, okay, what are we going to do with all of these other, the remaining 25 pages of recommendations? And the fact of the matter is, what we're going to do with them is we're going to dish them out to all of the different committees, because again, we've got 80 members of the Climate Solutions Caucus spread about all of the policy committees in the legislature. And the fact of the matter is, we can do a lot of these little things just as a part of other bills that are already moving. So these are the banner bills that we're working on that we know need to be sort of the standalone ideas, and then a lot of those other recommendations can be incorporated into bills that are already moving, right?
Could you explain a little bit more about how Cap and Invest works? Where does the money come from, and how is it invested? And how do we work on a regional effort?
Yes.
What does that look like?
So the regional effort has really been underway, and the Scott administration is in charge of that. And Governor Scott has dedicated sort of one person to be the lead on that, and that's really just kind of a part-time gig because he's the Deputy Secretary of the Agency of Natural Resources, and he has a whole slew of other responsibilities. So he has been negotiating with the other jurisdictions on behalf of the state of Vermont, and basically this is, as I understand it, a very slow-moving process that requires all of these jurisdictions to come together and agree to a cap and invest system. Subtext here, it's not going to be as big or as bold or as aggressive as you and I would like it to be, because it's going to include a bunch of other states, many of whom don't actually have the same level of commitment to climate action that we do. Okay, and if you think of this state right here, Pennsylvania, they have a fair amount of oil and gas and coal industry in Pennsylvania. They're going to be hard to convince that it needs to be big and bold and aggressive. But it is the train that's moving, and so we're going to jump on it. How does Cap and Invest work? The cap is applied at the wholesale fuel distributor level. And so there are a number of wholesalers who ship fuel, transportation fuel into Vermont. Some of them are based in New York. Some of them are based in Massachusetts. There's at least one that's based in Montreal. And so because this is going to be an agreement across a regional level, or a regional area, we're going to be paying the surcharge anyway, and so it makes no sense for us not to be involved in it. But you should know that the predictions are that New Hampshire will decide not to be involved in it, which will make it easier for our governor to possibly decide that he doesn't want to be involved in it, which is part of the reason why we feel it's important that you all understand that while this isn't the silver bullet, this is a really good deal, because that cap is going to be placed on the wholesale distributors. They will have to then buy credits in order to be able to distribute that fuel, and from that auction of credits will come proceeds back to the state of Vermont that we can use to invest in efficiency.
Just a quick, it also includes Virginia, which adds another big chunk of geography to that.
Oh, okay. We don't have it on the, that's right.
Thanks, Chris. Oh, Virginia is also included and is not on this map, because we were being a little Yankee centered there. I'm sorry, Chris.
There's only 12 jurisdictions on there.
So, quick question, Sarah. Where can we find a copy of the bill? And I'm not sure exactly what bill we're talking about, but perhaps all the bills we're talking about. Where can we find them?
So you can't. You can't because we don't start in session until January. And with respect to the TCI, we expect that the governor's people will present a proposal to the legislature at some point during the legislative session. But then I've also heard senators talking about going aggressively at actually creating a TCI enabling bill in the absence of the governor being ready to step forward with that. With respect to the Global Warming Solutions Act, this bill is getting a complete rewrite. Okay, so if you looked at the bill last year and you thought, well, that's a nice outline, but it's really missing a lot of detail and you really should go a lot deeper into how this works or that works, you're absolutely right. It was a starting point. And the chair of the committee that will be dealing with this, and Laura Sibilia is the vice chair of that committee, has been doing a great deal of work in trying to figure out how does a Vermont Global Warming Solutions Act work, what should we look at from the lessons in New York, what should we look at from what Maine did, and how can we write a bill that works well for Vermont. So January will be when you see that. Yes. Are there opportunities to influence how the proceeds of the Transportation and Climate Initiative will be spent? Yes. There was a public engagement process that the governor's people did through our regional planning commissions this past fall. And the regional planning commissions got together with a number of different select boards. Maybe some of you were a part of those conversations regionally.
Does everyone know Chris from the Windham Regional Commission?
No.
That's Chris. That's Chris.
Yes. So yes, there will be an opportunity for regional planning commissions, for select boards, and for the legislature to weigh in on what we do with the proceeds of TCI. And as I said, the enabling language that we put forward will specify that it has to be invested in greenhouse gas reduction activities.
Few questions about what we haven't talked about. So one, what were the sectors other than transportation and heating that were major contributors to emissions, if we could cover that? So the dark brown is transportation, the red is heating, the green is agriculture, the blue is electricity, the yellow is industrial process, the brown is waste management, and I don't know what that last thing on the key is. It says fossil fuel industry, but there's no, there's a very thin line, actually. There's a very thin line that I can barely see. Yes. So that would probably be larger in a state with more extractive industries than we have here. So that's what covered it. One of the things that's important as we look at other sectors and why we're focusing on Global Warming Solutions Act and TCI and a few other things is that transportation and heating are very, very hard to change in the particular state of Vermont without significant investment into helping people make that transition. So we have some guiding principles as a caucus, and one of them is that, and I'm paraphrasing here, that we're really working with people to make these transitions, that people aren't being asked to make transitions that they are not able to meet, that the burden is borne by the people most able to bear it. And when we think about transportation and heating, that means significant state investments in both of those projects, and so we need that income to do that. Wondering about agriculture and why we haven't talked about that. I know Representative Carolyn Partridge, who's the chair of the Ag Committee, was very sorry to not be able to make it today because they have been doing some great work on climate change in their committee.
So we know that that good agricultural practices are going to be critical to the kinds of activities that we need going forward, such as sequestering carbon out of the atmosphere, because it's not enough to turn off the spigot of emissions. If every single one of us started driving an electric vehicle and heating with a cold climate heat pump tomorrow, there's still too much carbon in the atmosphere now. We have to focus on those drawdown activities. And we know that good farming and good forestry practices are going to be key to making those solutions. So this is something that we know needs to be a focus of ours in future years. I don't think we're quite poised yet and ready yet to say we have an answer that says this is how we're going to help farmers or incentivize farmers to be doing some of those activities right now. Mike wanted to raise his hand.
Actually, we've already started. And regenerative soil practices are part of state law now. If you go on the website,
This is why it takes all of us, because we're citizen legislators and none of us is an expert in everything. So, thank you, Mike.
and the only reason I know is we had a regional climate energy summit down at Yale a few weeks ago, and Vermont presented the plan that it enacted last year on the new required agricultural practices. And within that are regenerative soil practices. If you want to look at what's happening, you can, and how many farmers are here today? Okay.
Really late at night.
So, there was a lot of pushback, I should say, especially from the dairy industry, and there continues to be, because this has to do with water quality as well. But if you go out to the country and you see it's happening now, farmers are clearing their fields from cow corn, and they're replanting it with a cover crop. So Vermont presented at this regional conference. This is on the agricultural website if you want to do a little digging. And I have to say, it felt good to hear Vermont receiving accolades for being ahead of the curve. It wasn't just other states there, but there were 2 Canadian provinces as well. So the other part of it is our forestry practices are an essential part of carbon sequestration too. And these are policies that are going to be ongoing. But what I can say is that Vermont's doing it. We're doing it now.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate the help with that question. There are a number of questions in the pile on the theme of how about we just use less, or how about we just drive less, or you know, that extends to land use planning and where do we put new housing, where do we put you know, the kinds of commercial developments. Those are all part of a great theme of things that we know we need to continue to work on. Those are difficult questions because we have a tradition of pushback against things like Act 250. We've got a rewrite of Act 250 that's being worked on right now, which will help to incorporate climate change into the land use planning for the next 50 years. So that is definitely a part of the conversation, but it's not a slam dunk. It's not a done deal.
Probably have another mic.
Honest, I was as close as I could.
We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Well, how about I just stand here and yell while she figures out how to do that. So what would it take to do things, for instance, like enforcing no idling and those kinds of things? There are a broad suite of things. Like I said, there was 27 pages of recommendations from all of the different groups, and some of them are small recommendations like this that we would like to use. We would like our driver's education curriculum to include how do you own an electric vehicle, because right now they do a lot on how do you check the oil in your internal combustion engine, but we want young people to know how to operate an electric vehicle. How do you share the road with a bicycle safely so that more of our short-term, you know, just around town commuting can be done by bicycle or by e-bike, which is really cool. You know, bike assist, you can go many more miles, you can go up hills much easier with an electric bike. And so a lot of these smaller things I haven't talked about, and I really would like to take all of these cards with me and make sure that I double check them with the recommendations, because there's probably new stuff in here that we didn't think about yet. Is that not working? No. Excellent. Well, we're just going to talk about that. You can do it, Sarah. Green building. First building. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, more about the building industry. So we have a bill that's in process right now that would, for the first time, require people who are general contractors, You know, anybody who's got that pickup truck and a set of tools in the back who comes to your house to, you know, maybe replace a window or fix your deck stairs or whatever. For the first time, to actually require them to just register with the Secretary of State's office. The Secretary of State's office, which is the office that Senator White and my committee, the Government Operations Committee, deals most directly with, they are in charge of licensing and then hopefully this certification process for any number of different professions that are involved in building energy. And we know that we want to get them thinking about in their continuing education requirements, in their certification process, just in the publications that they send out to licensees to start doing some of that education. We can also use our tech centers, because our tech centers should be offering some of this education or continuing education for people who are already in the industry. And we could go a long way to maximizing that investment that we've made in those tech centers, as well as helping to educate the folks out there who, oh, I don't need to know that because I've been a builder for 30 years. Well, actually things have changed a little bit since you were installing oil furnaces. So yes, we've got a lot of bringing together of resources to get people all pulling in the same direction in terms of building energy.
I think what I've seen at least very quickly is the same thing that happened in our caucus last year. Is everyone knows that we have an enormous, seemingly insurmountable problem in front of us. A need to make profound shifts in how we're living, how we're operating, how we're governing. And the changes that need to be made come from a million different directions. And we've seen that just with how these questions came up tonight, right? And so before we were acting as a really strong caucus, we had all of those individual bills all flying in simultaneously with everyone in this room brilliant ideas, and then another 150 people's brilliant ideas, and all of their constituents' brilliant ideas, which are all going to be necessary to make the changes we need to make. And so by coming together and really focusing on these four core ideas. I should never say numbers in public. I always list them wrong. These 4 core ideas, then we're able to sort of hold on to these bigger ideas about how are we going to convert electricity so that it's sustainable? How are we going to make sure we have the workforce that actually understands how to work on these things? What's it going to look like on the ground for people who can barely afford wood right now, let alone like taking, you know, the $100,000 that it takes to re-insulate your house sometimes. So by focusing on these sort of 4 banner issues, we can come together and really iron out all of the littler details together in a more comprehensive way, and that's what we're trying to do. What's really important that's happening here, and that needs to continue happening, is that all of your individual expertise and focus needs to be brought into those smaller details, because we can't think about all of those details ourselves. We need all of you to start thinking about them. So as we roll out these ideas, and as we're having conversations about them in committee, we're going to need to reach out to each of you to say, what about? Let's figure this out. Let me talk to my neighbors. I have a friend who lives in the Northeast Kingdom, and I'm going to call them and make sure they call their legislator. So what are we going to do during this session so that as we're ironing out the details that you brought to us today, we continue to have your voices in the State House saying, working with us on getting this stuff passed, working with our colleagues from non-Windham County communities, working with each other to sort of bring your neighbors along on this. So what we're going to transition to now, and I know we did not answer all of the questions, we answered a lot of them, and we're going to bring them back and send out emails with more comprehensive answers to more of them. It will take a while because, again, we are a citizen legislature, and most of us have jobs and families and very full schedules during the off session, which this is. Just want to own that again. What we'd like to transition to now is for you all in smaller groups, either at your table or again clustered, think about how you can show up during the session to really help us iron out these details, to be a champion in this work, to be an ally in this work with your neighbors and with us, and how you're going to bring someone else along in that process. So talks at your tables what will it look like during the session, what communications you need from us to be effective, what communications you need with either your activist neighbors or your non-activist neighbors to make this successful. What are you going to need and what are you going to do to sort of take this next step through the session so that we can get all of this legislation as perfect as you all want it to be and as we all want it to be. So we're going to spend about 20 minutes talking about that and then we're going to wrap up. If someone could take notes at each table, that would be the best. I do. I don't know about the legs.
I should take notes all the time.
I'm gonna listen.
So what I heard was, everybody knows that this is really the problem. I think that's the problem. Those of us in the room
We can't hear you, Richard.
Sorry, she mentioned, she said, everybody knows this is a really big problem. And the problem is, everybody doesn't know, or isn't aware of the truth of how big the problem is.
But and it's a good point.
But my point is that electoral map is more complicated than it looks.
Like, I mean, I think it's kind of like it's actually a good thing. I think that we should be able to
Because they'll tell you about it.
I mean, like, and
software like
from them I mean, is that the kind of thing that they can, people in individual committees can let the public know about?
You're still going to have heavy.
Sometimes the lobbyists so I could be wrong, but my understanding is that each time a bill moves to a new committee, that form of the bill is available on the website. Right, but that means that you have to know the name of it, you have to be able to find it, look it up on the website. And that doesn't tell you what happens afterwards. I mean, I'm interested to see what it is, to see what happens, talk about what they need to show up. That was one of the questions. How are we planning to show up? What do we need in order to show up? But then it sounds like in I would love, I'm a middle school teacher, and I love to have a clear path of access for my students, how to get involved, particularly in this initiative in a way that feels like they have a voice rather than they're being told what to do or that they're not welcome. That's very
Tonight, new for our building. And it's all asphalt, cement, So we take all of the water that's falling on land and we send it off into the ocean, and that's how we have so that it doesn't destroy. Because it comes down to natural regenerative agriculture.
It sounds like what you're saying is that you'd like to see more focus on non-regenerative action. In terms of like, coming back to like how can we support like positive changes in Vermont, you know, and because I feel like we really are making sure that
what I'm particularly concerned about is what I really learned and experienced in the industry I work in. Overbroad, you just can't get away from the fact that there are a number of very, very strong actors who don't want to see anything change because they see it as a threat to their bottom line. Very simple. And you know, they're the auto dealers, they're the fuel dealers, there's Green Mountain Power. They're all heavily invested in the status quo, and they've got big resources to mobilize to try to maintain that status quo, compared to us, either disorganized citizens or you know, associations. All the logos on that slide are our advocates. Getting them all to line up.
right, like rather than saying like tempting, like that's not good enough. But to say like
People forget that kind of thing has been done.
right, so for a more effort, conservation was made a priority.
Yeah, at that level, it's the same price.
I don't think we're going to be doing this without that kind of
best ways to look at this. There's great economic opportunity here. New energies, new technologies, we can build in technologies.
often by industry. Whether we're in wholesale or Kimberly, in the state up there,
That's a good question. I heard from a constituent who drives an oil truck. He says, you're trying to put me out of business. I said, I'm not. I'm trying to help you see this other opportunities.
But if I have this right,
He makes good points. He says, my business
think about these core legislative initiatives.
gives good paying jobs, it helps our community.
Emily was saying, you know, like
You need to have
baby steps and small bites. So I'm not really sure how. What can I do? This seems like, you know what I mean? Like they're doing those things.
What can we do?
Oh, you got you and I don't know constituent input.
And when?
I mean, that's a huge issue.
That's right.
Where to help them,
part of the new product that they're coming along for.
That's the other thing. We're going to have other things to maintain, not cars necessarily, but
I hear that you can get excited about it. I feel like I'm not excited about it.
we're going to have some people that are going to have to really change.
Another piece of this, I think that we're going to, this is going to your point, about not knowing what to do. I mean, I think a big part of what can be done, for those who are willing and able to do it, and frankly have the patience to do it, it almost goes back to organizing like we've done, you know, well, like it always has to be done for social change, which is being able to teach ourselves how to facilitate those hard conversations. recognizing it's gonna take years to have those conversations, having really honest conversations, but there are gonna be people who are
Really, a lot of influence over adults. Your parents, their friends, your grandparents, your uncles, they all love you, trust you, they raised you. You have a tremendous opportunity to convince them of what needs to happen. You can work on that in concert with your other friends, and even create a campaign to get adults educated and involved.
And there's a lack of education among youth. I think it's important for me to talk to my friends who are not informed. Hilltop, Montessori School.
So you participated in the student strike. That same week, I was up in writing campaign.
and that's a hard conversation to have. How do you model things about
Well, that needs to be a collaboration of adults and students. We need to talk to Windham, as a group, to say, how come all of Windham doesn't do this? That's a collaboration.
And one of the things that happened for a lot of people nationwide, students across the country, texting each other, creating these channels as far as
networking instead of being able to tell you directly what we want to happen systemically. Because the idea that we're all going to start serving more and then bringing them back to the grocery store. And not the point of
Rachel over here said a great thing to me right before folks went into their groups to have a conversation. Rachel is Tristan Tolino's constituent, and she said, what do those of us with awesome legislators, awesome representatives do? Because I know that lobbying my legislator is not the most effective use of my time. And I want to say that Windham County is just awesome. And I know that, in Vermont, we like to think that we're every little corner is more special than every other corner in our states. We're special in the other states. But I think in this particular case, it's true in Windham County. And so I would love if we sort of keep that in mind, that we have a little bit of a preaching to the converted in this, I hate that expression, I just used it, in this room. And so ask folks to go around and just at each table, folks could say sort of one idea that they came up with for how to carry this momentum into the session and work in partnership with legislators, really keeping in mind that there's a great big state out there that elected a Republican governor. So that means something about sort of what some of your other Vermonters are and where some of their decisions around things might lie. So can we start all the way in the back with sort of one idea to carry in, and then we'll collect your notes and compile them later. Sorry to warn you about the report out.
Most of what was talked about at this table was declaring as an emergency, and by declaring that would help things shift more quickly, because the time is so very small that we have to change things as humans.
Okay, so declaring an emergency to bring some more urgency for other folks in the state.
Did you hear that? Okay, would you request it? Okay.
One idea for how we can sort of work as allies moving into the legislative session, get these bills passed.
The first thing that came up was, no matter how wonderful we feel about you reps, we can't let you be alone. We must support you all the time. And I gave a little vignette about my personal experience with that, being on a select board, and people not thinking they had to come to a meeting because I was on the select board. Well, they needed to come to the meeting. And we need to be supporting all of you every day. And you know that we do, but you need to hear it.
So Jonathan is not a plant. So he's saying that to really be supporting legislators just because someone sort of, you know someone is carrying your torch doesn't mean you can leave them standing alone. Their arm might get tired. So show up, and show up in a wide variety of ways. How about in the back?
Oh, a lot that was talked about at this table was communication between youth and talking to classmates and friends about climate and making sure they are educated and know what's going on.
Thank you. So informing your peers, and that's really true for youth, and you're doing a great job of that. And I think that could be true for everyone in the room. Talking to your peers, right here.
One idea we had was just reaching out to our friends and neighbors who are in industries like car dealerships or fuel distributors or whatever, just letting them know that we don't want to leave them behind, whatever that, we don't have all the answers.
I like that.
I love that. And the guiding principles that we drafted for our caucus that we'll send out when we have sort of all of our publications final really talks about not leaving anyone behind and making sure that we're talking to our neighbors, to our friends, to know that we're going to bring them along on this transition. Thank you.
I guess the first thing that we talked about at this table was making sure we have clear communication between the caucus and ourselves, especially as a bill might progress from committee to committee and how things could be changed little by little as that progresses. And if the more we are better informed about those changes, the better we can then support and add our voices to those bills.
Thank you.
Amen.
The email sign up is moving around. If it's stuck somewhere, can someone unstick it and move it more? Thank you. Because we really want to keep you informed as legislation is moving. Things change really fast, and it's really important to stay hooked up. We're going to talk about some of that a little bit. All the way in the back.
I think we spent more time talking about our needs than how we could help, but I think one that kind of bridges it is it really helps if we feel like there's something happening at the state level, that we can hear about it and take it out and broadcast it to everybody and get people energized around something that feels like it's happening that's bigger than just us.
Thank you. There is something happening, and we want you to be a part of it every day, so thanks for wanting that. Over here.
I will say one thing. I think we acted out the dilemma of what about this part? What about this part? We actually, instead of focusing on how to support you all, we acted all of the butts. There's this piece, there's this piece, there's this piece, and what the tension of that, and more than coming up with anything.
So,
would that be about right?
So you acknowledge this tension of continuing saying, what about, and I don't think I speak alone as a legislator to say, that's actually what my brain does when I'm falling asleep at night now. Say, what about this other piece that should be added to this piece and that piece? Yes.
Yeah.
It's real, and we need to find a path through it. Thank you. Are you a group? Yes, you are. Okay.
So one thing we talked about was that in addition to doubling down on efforts to mitigate climate change, we need to look to resilience and adaptation, and that could be a motivation that brings more people into the tent. You know, people that may not be in this room because they're not environmental zealots, but nonetheless want to keep their families safe. And that should be an entry to reach, that other side of the aisle, the different segment of the population. And a lot of the solutions could be the same, but it's a different way to frame it.
So changing framing to bring more people to the table. Resiliency is a great way to bring more people to the table. Another one is talking about sort of warm homes rather than sort of other ways. We talk about fuel efficiency and heat efficiency and all of that stuff, just warm homes. And really sort of talking across language, especially with resiliency. Thank you. We have a few more ideas that we want to make sure you have before you leave, and Sarah's going to share them with you.
Okay, so I alluded to this at the beginning of the presentation, but first and foremost, what this state needs in terms of being able to make bold climate action is we need a governor who's willing to lead. So I don't know if you remember that cartoon, and if you remember what's just off behind the governor over here in that cartoon, but we need a governor who's actually driving us in the right direction, and right now, he seems to be being driven more by his political cronies and political operatives in the background than being driven by standing by his word and what he told Vermonters when he said Vermont will join the U.S. Climate Alliance. President Trump may pull the country out, but Vermont will still meet its goals. Now, the fact of the matter is, as I said at the beginning, that he hasn't been a man of his word yet, but we're going to hold out hope that with lots of pressure from good folks like you that might ask him some of these questions, that maybe he will start to think that there's value in leading on climate. So, Governor Governor Scott, did you mean it when you said that Vermont would meet its Paris climate goals? Which of your Climate Action Commission 50-plus recommendations are you going to implement this year, okay? These were brilliant people from all around the state. Anybody in this room either a part of the Climate Action Commission or go to any of their meetings? Really smart people, really good, thoughtful work being put into those recommendations, and that has been sitting on the shelf now for 2 years. So what are you going to do this year? The third thing that we need to ask him, and this is time sensitive, this needs to be being asked right now because he's asking for public input on his budget that he's going to present to us in January. I don't know if you've seen it circulating around, but literally there is a notice from his Secretary of Administration or from Adam Gresham, the finance. I don't know if you know where we could point people to that. I saw it in Digger a couple days ago. That there is a call from the governor's office for Vermonters to give input on what the budget priority should be.
Go to his website too.
Go to his website. Yep, you can go on to the governor's website. You can get his contact information, and you can ask him how are you going to prioritize climate action in your budget? Because the fact of the matter is, the legislature. We're gone home for 7 months out of the year, and when we come back in January, he presents his proposed budget, and that's the starting point. So if the starting point has no investment, it makes it much more difficult for the legislature to find that investment.
Right, so Sarah, just to add to that, if there is nothing up front, then we start from in a hole. We don't want to start from in a hole in the conversation. That's what she's trying to say. We'll start from whatever he proposes. So we've got to get something in there so we're not starting behind.
Right, exactly. Yes, what will we see in your January budget that helps Vermont meet the challenge of our climate crisis?
And Sarah?
Yes.
I think it's helpful, I've directed people to where those 53 recommendations are. It's a pretty complicated web address, but it's on A&R's site, I believe, right?
I found it by Googling Vermont Climate Action Commission report. And so you probably will be able to find it. It's on the A&R website. The Climate Action Commission is the name of the organization that you need to look to.
And we will send out this PowerPoint to anyone who
signed
up on that sheet that I hope is still moving. Is it still moving? Great.
So there's a couple of other, yes.
Some of us got signed up on the computer.
Yes, those good too.
You don't need to sign up.
You do not need to write it down if you put yours in.
Oh, if we RSVP'd for this meeting, we don't
No,
have
no, just if you signed in when you got here on my iPad before I gave up on that as a viable option.
The line around the block was the first indication that we needed to bail on that and go paper. So, there's other things that you can do to help build this momentum right now. You can ask other legislators that you come into contact with, because you know that the folks who are here today are wanting to have this conversation with you, but you can ask other elected officials, are you on board with the climate agenda? You can ask every one of your elected officials that question.
How many people in this room have a friend who lives in Vermont but not in Windham County?
There we go. All right.
Perfect. That is your biggest point of leverage. Have them call their legislators.
What about the leadership of the House? How are you feeling? Are you feeling led by leadership?
Well, we have Representative Toledo and Representative Long, who are both in House leadership, and they're here with us.
We're here and we're listening. And Senate leadership.
And Senator
And
Balint.
Senate leadership,
Yeah.
yes, our majority leader.
We're looking here.
So I will tell you though, in answer to that question, that I can tell that they are feeling that there is momentum. When they hear that there were 75 people in Windham, and there were 40 people in Greensboro, and there were 68 people in Arlington, you know, that makes people stand up and pay attention. So it's definitely building a groundswell of movement.
Why don't we meet at the State House?
When? Do you mean in January? Yeah. So actually, the Youth Climate Congress that happened just on Sunday was a fabulous example of people coming together around climate issues. And they had been working on drafting their declaration of a climate emergency and their declaration of directives of what they want their government to do for the climate emergency. And it was absolutely fantastic to see that these young people came together to put together this declaration. They're going to deliver that on the first day of the legislative session to the governor and to the House and Senate. There's no reason why other groups can't do a similar thing. And you know, if that's something that comes out of one of these meetings, then great. You know, it's all good at building momentum. A couple of other ways that you can stay in touch and stay involved. There was a list of organizations. Many of these organizations have newsletters and email. VNRC and Vermont Conservation Voters do a weekly climate dispatch. You can find that on Facebook. They do a Facebook Live every Friday during the session talking about what's happening. As Emilie said, the Climate Solutions Caucus is going to be much more proactive about reaching out to people during the legislative session this year to share with you a call to action, to share with you weekly updates about what's going on. And as I said, we've got little pieces that can be being worked on in every single committee. So every single legislator is going to be able to have a small part in what we're doing for climate action this year.
Sarah?
Yes.
Just real quick, you can sign on to the Youth Climate Congress Declaration on VPIRG's site. You can just go and find and sign your name and support what this amazing declaration that was worked on for months and months. And then some folks came in on the end, some people have been working on it for months and just ratified this, and some good work.
So most of these organizations that send out regular updates are in close conversation with most of us on a daily basis, and so that's a really good way to also stay in the loop.
So a couple of other things that you can do that really help. When you're reading the morning news online and you see some comments that are less than helpful or less than focused on the fact that we have a crisis and we need to be acting, you can weigh in there on the comments. I find oftentimes that our people are not all that active on the climate, on comments on climate issues. And it is sometimes helpful to just have a little bit of balance out there. Even if what you're saying is you know, relatively neutral. Just letting your other neighbors know that, hey, it's okay to wade in that forum and say, yes, Vermont should be acting on climate. And writing letters to the editor the good old-fashioned way, and sending them out to the online publications as well is also important.
And I want to make sure everyone in Windham County knows that there's a Right for Climate event that happens weekly. Who here goes to that event? Great. And so, and we'll send out updates about that with the whole thing too. But connect with Lissa if you want to learn more about that. Right there behind you. Yes.
I think just one other pitch, and this is less legislative, but just a number of your town, like conservation commissions, energy committees, town planning commissions, select boards, would love to actually see people interested in the issues that you're dealing with in your own town. Oftentimes I think they feel like they're working in a bubble or doing work that, you know, that that's not necessarily appreciated or really kind of, but your town plan policies, even if most every town has a town plan, the region except Searsburg and Athens. And Athens has tried a couple of times. But one of the things that we're going to do as a regional commission, but also I'm trying to encourage towns to do, is look at what you say you want your town to be, and then look at what the policies actually say can happen in your town when it comes to Act 250 and other things like that. Because so it's not, this isn't a this or that, but this is a this and that. Be engaged with your legislators, tell them what you need, but also try to engage at the local level, because at some point I'm convinced that we're going to start seeing either ex-urban sprawl coming up to 1891 or Route 2, especially for southeast Vermont, or some other big thing's going to happen like another 38 hurricane. You're already seeing more daytime flooding. We're going to see pressures here that I don't think we're necessarily seeing now. And right now the path of least resistance is large lot development on Class 3 town roads. And so please engage with your local committees, commissions. It may not, because everything that ultimately relates to those planning processes and all, ultimately get at this too. So I would just encourage you to get involved at that local level.
Thank you, Chris. So get involved at the level that's working for you. Get involved locally. Get involved with your neighbor. Call your friends in other counties. Call the governor. Write letters. Follow the information. If you have technical expertise on these issues, whether that is sort of from a scientific perspective, from the day-to-day work that you're doing, that what you've learned, or from the experience that you're living every day trying to adapt resiliently, please get involved and let us know about that. I really want to thank Sarah and her co-chair, Chris Pearson, for the incredible work they've done as co-chairs of the Climate Conference. We are an organized, capable group now that's able to come together and look comprehensively and look into the future, so that all of these little bits and pieces of legislation that we basically, you all modeled exactly how it works in the legislature today. And so we are really able, with their leadership, to come together and focus in and really take the next steps for this emergency. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming. Thanks to all the legislators for coming. Yes, what is your question?
So the tables and chairs need to come down.
Oh, thank you. If people, that is the kindest question. So as we're wrapping up, if you have a card that has information you would like me to have, please place it in this little corner right here on that table. If you want to help clean up, please feel free to collect the things that don't have writing on them and put them in that box right there. And the chairs could be hung up. If you would like to do that helpfully, that would be lovely. And if you have one more thing, and if you have not signed up on that email list, I will move it up to this table right here so you can come sign up before you leave.
I have all of them.
Thank you.
You know all the lists.
Byron, thank you. Thank you very much.
Spoken like somebody just had to clean up after many meetings.